Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to Gift of Healing TV. I'm Sara Jane, and I am delighted to be joined by Jessica Taylor for our program this evening. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's lovely to be here.
Thank you. Now, we're going to be sharing a journey through theology, unveiling the jewels of a spiritual awakening. But I'm going to share Jessica's bio first. The notion that strength and dexterity is not about how much you can withstand, but how often you can stand up after finding yourself on the ground. That has been the motto of Jessica's life, and she owes her accomplishments to it, despite all that she has been through. Born in Ireland, Jessica tasted fame early when she became a professional child actor and an award-winning step dancer. In the 50s, while nursing at an institution in Surrey, England, she tended to two royal prince sisters, Catherine and Nerissa, who were portrayed in the film The Crown. After immigrating to Canada with her husband and two young daughters, Jessica successfully owned a Merle Norman cosmetic studio in Ontario. However, the glory did not matter when she became a survivor of a life-threatening head injury, which inspired her to initiate a brain injury awareness campaign in 1992. Apart from appearing on several radio and TV shows, such as Hidden Heroes, Canada, and Nationwide, Ireland, Jessica's campaign has been honoured by several celebrities, such as Mary Robinson, a former president of Ireland, and Sarah Ferguson. Due to having lost all knowledge of general education, in order to educate herself after her life-threatening injury, Jessica studied the science of the supernatural, known as theology, at the Vatican. As a result of her findings, she now shares them in a book entitled A Spiritual Awakening in Search of Hidden Jewels. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us. I always like to ask my guests to share a little of their story. So could you share a little about your childhood in Ireland?
Well, you know, as I'm going to be 87 in July, it was the war, during the war. But of course, in Ireland, we weren't affected because Ireland didn't participate. But I remember my mother having to get food tokens. But that was a little later on when I was very, very small. My father had a traveling show business, and that was the real, like before movies, people like my father would produce his own shows and go from town to town all over Ireland and book theatres. So this traveling was just quite an incredible journey. And I played roles, one of which was a famous role called East Lynne, was the name of the title of the play, East Lynne, which actually got an Oscar for the film of the same story some years previously. But I played a little boy who died for the want of his mother, who had left his father. Left my father, I should say. And one day I was watching TV and an interview with Liza Minnelli's father, Linsett Minnelli. And I wanted to jump into the screen when I heard him say he played Little Willie in East Lynne when he was a child. Can you imagine? I wanted to meet him and just hug him and say, me too.
Oh, and it's so beautiful to have those memories and sort of And to the fact that you paid a little boy when you're very definitely a little girl.
Yeah. You know, my hair was long, blonde, and it put into ringlets like our aristocratic children. You know, little boys who had ringlets like that in those days. Yeah. So that was a lot of fun.
And that's just it, isn't it? Life has changed so much, even within our lifetime. So sort of, yeah, absolutely. Your brain injury, or your head injury, which obviously very much affected your brain. Do you want to share a little of what you went through and the rehabilitation of that?
Oh, that's actually a long story. And I wrote a memoir entitled From Tragedy to Triumph, Reawakening My Broken Brain, to cover everything that happened. It's not all sad story, because readers tell me that they laugh and cry throughout. But it was devastating. Head injury, brain injury. You know, people should know more about it. And that's why I wanted to write my memoir. And hopefully a film will be made of it one day. And this is not ego talking. It's just a screenwriter who read my book loved it so much. He wrote the screenplay, 120 pages, but that needs representing. But to get back to what happened, I had a business in Toronto, Merle Lawman Cosmetics, which was all over America and Canada. And I went with a sales rep to pick up some supplies for my studio on November 15, 1969. And anyway, I'd never been to the premises before. That they were styling wigs for me, because 69 was wig boom year, and as well as selling cosmetic, I was also selling wigs. You know, put a wig on a client on a Saturday night before they went out, and you know, some girls, if they had dark hair, they wanted to be blonde, some the other way around. And even the husbands would sometimes say, "Can you put a blonde wig on my wife for tonight, please?" So it was a lot of fun. But I went with this sales rep to this unknown location, and I just looked at a picture window to the right of the door, and I saw hairdressing, you know, that it was a hairdressing studio. So when he opened the door, I walked in thinking I was on ground level. I wasn't. I was at the top of 15 stairs, and we were to go downstairs to the supplier's office, but there was no light on, and me thinking that I was on ground level, I just took a couple of steps and went head first down, and my head struck against a steel-plated burglar-proof door at the bottom. But then off to hospital, and unfortunately we did not have CAT scans or any of the equipments to determine head injury. So in a way, I was left out into the world with undetected brain injury. And the things that happened to me in the hospital, you know, like waking up one day and seeing two of myself, one up and one down, because one of my eyes, there was a hemorrhage behind my right eye, which pushed it almost out of its socket. So that was a memory that I'll never forget, going into that bathroom and seeing what I looked like. And apparently I was there for quite a long time. But then everything that happens to everyone else who's had a brain injury happened, like suicidal depression. But some people become clairvoyant after a head injury. and I believe it's to do with the theta energy that in our brain. You know, we have the different levels of energy in our brain. And the theta, there's actually a letter from a doctor who gave me a test, and he said what's so unusual is the fact that her theta level is predominant. And of all things, the theta level is where people who are clairvoyant, people who do hands-on healing, you know, people who do so-called extraordinary things. But I wasn't aware of any of this. But things did start happening. Like I did become clairvoyant for telling people their whole life. Nothing like that had ever happened before. Tons of beautiful poems came through me, not from me, they came through me. And I would sit on a chair with people around me, talking, listening to them, and I'd have to hold on to I still remember this vividly as well. I would have to hold on to the seat because I felt I was zooming out into space. So I was kind of elevating in some way. But I know what this was. It took years to establish why I was like two people, my higher self person and my lower self person, this physical body. And I know I was tapping in to my soul self more than I was my lower self because of these extraordinary things happening.
Oh, and I'm sure that got quite scary at times, didn't it?
Well, I had no knowledge because I had forgotten everything I'd ever learned. I didn't know how to cook, sew, couldn't cross the streets. With traffic lights, I wouldn't understand them. I'd just hang on to strangers who gave me some weird looks. But I didn't know anything. Everything was erased. All memory was erased. So, you know, I was like a newborn baby, you could say, in a 31-year-old body.
So what drew you to sort of go and sort of study theology at the Vatican?
Well, I didn't intend studying theology at all. I didn't know what it was. I knew I had to either take my life or face the challenge, accept the challenge, refuse to fail. That's one of my quotes that I pass on to head injured people: accept challenge, refuse to fail. And I kept this quote up over and over again. And so I thought, okay, I've got to start studying about life and learning and getting books and reading. But the books that seemed to be the most important to me were on spirituality. And I was actually living in Ryde, a beautiful little town, Ryde, in Isle of Wight, the south of England. I fell in love with the place. And I went into a library there, and I just said, can you help me? I've had a brain injury. I don't know anything. And she was quite shocked, surprised, and took me into the research room. And I said, what are these books for? What are those books for? She said, well, to go back. She said, what do you want to study? Now, I didn't even know the word God. And that's the word that came out of my mouth. And so then she pointed out books on the shelf, and they were Vatican encyclopedias. And so that was my first kickoff into learning about theology. And there I established that theology, according to the Vatican, it means the science of the supernatural. I mean, that's a far cry from what is preached to people, you know, the science of the supernatural. And, you know, I learned things, I learned about words. It was very difficult because it was also kind of advanced literature for me, but I made note after note after note. I carried a journal anyway because of my brain injury and memory problems. So I wrote everything down every day that happened to me, and I continued to write note after note after what I found in those books. And I established then the word God in Hebrew is Elohim, which is a plural male-female aspects, has male and female aspects, Elohim. And I kind of fell in love with that word. Then I read that, again, from Vatican literature, that the words Satan and devil were enemy and slanderer originally. And I studied Jesus's life. And in my second book, A Spiritual Awakening, I've written God knows how many chapters about Jesus's life. I just fell in love with the man and explored everything there was in literature about him, you know, from the Essenes and the Gnostic scriptures. And then also they have a word at the Vatican for reincarnation. And of all things, it's metempsychosis. And the meaning of it, according to their book, is the passing of one soul to another body soul, passing of a soul from body to body. Now that has never been explained to people either. So why have all of this hidden away from people? That, you know, this is hard to understand. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm certainly somebody, having been raised a Catholic, but I actually very much believe that we have multiple lifetimes. I don't know whether I would call it reincarnation, but I believe that our soul has many lifetimes. And I suppose if you think, I think if I thought about the word reincarnation, it would be me as I am coming back. But of course, that isn't what it's about. It's about our soul continues. Just because our body dies, and I love the way Neil Donald Walsh puts it, it's our continuation day. So our soul continues, it goes back to source, or however you choose to think about it, and then can choose or is asked to come back and has another lifetime, has another experience. Is that the understanding that you came to?
No, absolutely. Yeah. And it made a lot of sense to me as well. You know, it just everything made sense to me. Everything that I learned made sense to me because the dogmas were gone from my head, you know, from my brain. So I started with a clean slate, so to speak. And, you know, I mean, the people of Madagascar, Australia, West Africans, New Guineas, the tribes of North and South America, ancient inhabitants of Europe, such as Druids and Greeks, they preserved the reincarnational creed. And then there was a bishop called Bishop Origen, another one I fell in love with. I keep falling in love with these people. In 553 AD, what a beautiful, wonderful bishop he was. I studied his life all those years ago. He existed, and he wrote about reincarnation. And what happened to him? He was put into jail and tortured and died. Because again, I don't understand. Why did the church block reincarnation? Was it because of the Emperor Justinian? He put out curses, which I have in my book, every one of them. And one of the curses was if you believed in reincarnation, you were cursed. I don't know if it was that. That was back in the 500s, the Emperor Justinian. Why? I don't know. I don't know what the logic is. I really don't. What do you think? Why they block it?
If I really think, I think it's really difficult. And when we were talking yesterday, I mentioned the book, The Da Vinci Code, and that book, so much of that book spoke to me as having huge aspects of truth and way outside sort of religious teachings. And the fact that when that book then was turned into a film, suddenly there were programs here in the UK trying to debunk everything in that book. And sort of saying, no, it's not true. Sequence is all that. It's just like, so I think there is a truth out there that sadly has been hidden, whether it's about control, I don't know. I don't want to sort of, I think we all have a sense of these things for ourselves. Are we open to listen? I must admit, when you use the word theology, my reaction was, okay, this is to do with religion, but it actually isn't anything to do with religion. Aspects have been taken. This is the sense I'm getting from what you're saying, and this is my sense, is that aspects of it have been taken and have been used to create a religion. And any aspect that they feel is uncomfortable, could create confusion, they've taken out and they won't talk about. So that's the sense from what you're saying that I'm getting.
Well, yeah, it's power. It's like mafia. It's power over people. And were they frightened that unless people were told to be afraid that they go astray? I don't know. It's quite mind-boggling to understand it. Unless it's money-making control organization. That's all I can think about it. How it started, that is. There's really good people that go to mass and do good things and everything else, but they should be educated, and I'd love to see education, spiritual education, incorporated for school children. Let them know you are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars, the famous quote.
Desiderata.
Yeah, and teach them, teach them the truth. There's nothing wrong with that. And reincarnation, we incarnate. So the word re associated with that makes sense to me as well. And if children are taught about that, then the same thing would happen as in Buddhism, where there's in thousands and thousands of people, maybe one minor crime, in thousands of people. Whereas in the West here, there's one crime in every few hundred. Because they would know then that you get that Canadian expression, comeuppance. If you do harm, you do wrong, you come back and you pay for it. That to me, it's simple. It's just simple logic. That's what it is to me. And
that sounds to me like you're talking about karma.
Yeah, karma, your actions in this life. And it's even in the Bible. I was blessed to have befriended a 90-year-old retired canon of the Roman Catholic Church when I was researching in Ireland. And another man I fell in love with. If he'd been 30 years younger, I would have said, get out of here and let's get married. But we got on so well. We're like two souls reunited. And I was brought up a Protestant, and this is Roman Catholic trees. And one memory I have that's so lovely to me is he's sitting in a chair. And of course, I was in the middle of doing tons of research. So I'm standing up and like preaching to him. And he said, Jessica, this is so unusual. I'm sitting and you're standing. But he revealed secrets to me that he was not allowed to tell his congregation. And they're in my book, A Spiritual Awakening. And they blow your mind when you hear them. Absolutely incredible. And also he shared with me the Vulgate Bible of 400 AD. Now, you can't get that Bible. It was only priests were allowed to have that Bible. That talk about control. And there's 52 chapters in that Bible, in Ecclesiasticus. And reincarnation is in there. And those 52 chapters have been left out of all modern Bibles. So how is that for conspiracy? That's all I can call it, is conspiracy. I have quote after quote from the Vulgate Bible in my book. And I actually thought I'd go with a Christian publisher at first, before I went to Amazon. And I got out of it because they said you had to get permission to quote from the Vulgate Bible. What are you talking about? Do I have to get permission from the Pope? On your bike? Like, no way. Bibles are not owned by anyone. Bibles are for the public. And that's it. So I have quoted from the Vulgate in A Spiritual Awakening. And, you know, there's quotes about reincarnation nonstop. St. Paul talking about the dead raised to life again. I've put like a ton of quotes from the Bible supporting reincarnation.
So you talk about unveiling the jewels of a spiritual awakening. So would you like to share a jewel or two that you've unveiled?
Well, I think, you know, what I've said to you about the Vulgate Bible, the Nag. I like people to read the Nag Hammadi library secrets. They're scripts from Mary Magdalene, from Paul, and the others, and they speak constantly about reincarnation. And I mean, that's pre-Bible, you know. So the Essenes and the Gnostics, I like people to read about them as well. I've written a lot about, you know, the words of the Essenes and the words of the Gnostics, and they all support reincarnation. I mean, a person would have to read the book because, like, for me to memorize everything in it, it is, especially with memory impairment, is a nightmare. But thankfully, the readers now say that a spiritual awakening gives a different perspective on life. And I love that quote from them. It gives a different perspective on life. I think it's showing people, you know, that the universe is alive, consciousness is there. I firmly believe that consciousness emits from the universal energy. It's an energy, consciousness. And that's how we're all one, because we're all part of that consciousness. And then there are levels of consciousness called frequencies. And I've written a lot about, you know, energy, frequencies, consciousness, and that as well. And people are on different levels of consciousness, and there's actually a quote from St. Paul substantiating that as well. And that's in Bibles, where he said one person can be capable of reading a language they've never read, one person will be fine, blah, blah, blah. All different levels of frequency. You know, like humans are supposed to have a higher frequency level than an insect. But what about animals? You know, I mean, their consciousness is, they're so aware of everything. Cats and dogs, cows, you name it, horses. Their intelligence is super high. So their consciousness is without any stigmas or anything else. It just, they're straight into their consciousness, straight into it. And, you know, they know when it's time to eat. They know, you know, to hide from the rain. You know, even a butterfly knows to hide from the rain, or their wings will, you know, be harmed. Yeah, you know, I'd love for people to know that they can raise their consciousness, and that, to me, that is affiliated with a subject called Theology, Theurgy. I speak to people and I say, do you know about, have you ever heard of Theology? No, I have no idea. I have a whole chapter about that in my book, Spiritual Awakening. At one time, way back in history, two things were looked on. Theology, theology was talking about the Godhead, and Theurgy was acting on the energy, the forces from that Godhead. So people should rightfully, people who are clairvoyant, hands-on healers, do any of these so-called miracles, should all be called theurgists. And I actually wrote to a woman in England who was finding murdered bodies for the police. And I said, do you know you are a theurgist? And she said, she was so thrilled. She said, when people ask me, what do? I just say, I'm a theurgist. Instead of having to say, I'm a clairvoyant, or I work for the police and I'm a theurgist. You know, I would like people to know about that as well, because it does exist. You know, it's not a myth.
We're all unique individuals, aren't we? And we have our strengths and we have our weaknesses, and because we're not here to do everything. But the most important thing is really to be open-minded, to sort of, for me, it's what do I feel when I hear something? And I've had situations where I've read something and to do with sort of Mary Magdalene, you know, sort of to do with other things within religion, but have actually stepped outside what I was taught. And to read that and then to feel that energy inside me of a truth. And so it's being open to the fact that there are truths beyond what we have been taught and what we are told.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. And that they're my jewels in my book. Yeah, I didn't intend writing that book. I had no intention, because I actually, it was so hard for me to write my memoir. I thought I'll never write another book as long as I live. But what I learned from 20 years of researching, like, because of my injury, it took me longer than it would everybody else, you know, to get the book. I had to write it about 17 times and get editorial nonstop. But I've lost my thought there for a minute. Oh yeah,
right.
I had no intention of writing it, but what I learned, I thought, oh my God, I have got to share this with the world. I have got to. You know, it wouldn't be good karma for me if I didn't share what I got. And oddly enough, a friend took me to a East Indian psychic medium in Brighton, England, at one time, because she knew how popular he was and how accurate he was. And he said, you have 2 projects in your life, meaning my 2 books, obviously. He said, there is a spiritual connotation in the first one, but in the second one, he just, when his arms spread out, oh, biggest connotation in this second project. Well, I went out and said to my friend, he's a nutcase. There's no way in hell I would ever write a second book. So you see how accurate him as a theologist was. Yeah. So that was the most accurate I've ever heard of, a psychic experience from anyone, and it was from myself, Professor Mirza.
I love that, because my youngest sister actually did that to me last year. I said, right, I'm never doing another multi-author book, and this is sharing sort of energies and stories to support people in their own growth, but from our own life experiences. And she said, but Sarah, you are going to do one and you're going to lead it. And it was just like, oh yeah, within 2 days I knew what that was all going to be about. But so there are amazing people out there, and they do know. My sister is amazing. I know I channel a lot. It's trusting, and I know for some people it would be, and I know I've said it before, well, why me? But it's that thing of, why not me? Because actually we are all connected. We are connected to each other. We are connected to whatever people want to consider source as being. So we have that ability if we open to the connections that we all have.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We are all one, but we're not all one with people. We're all one with nature, and animals and insects, even with everything. We're all one, and that's all to do with that consciousness I call God consciousness in my book. Literally, to me, that is God. I know Oprah Winfrey said the universe is God, but which ties in, because consciousness has to come from somewhere. It's not in our brain. So why not the universe? And, I'm sharing that with people. If they don't believe it, they don't. But, so far my readers have said it makes more sense to them than anything they were taught in religion. And we are all one without any, we may be on different levels of frequency and consciousness and that, but we are all one. And, the First Nation people, I love their philosophy. They don't have a religion. They just have a way of life, like Buddhism. And they believe we're all one with nature and people. Yeah. Their beliefs are beautiful.
Oh, 100% there, sort of, because they refer to the standing people, which are the trees, so the 4-leggeds and the 2-leggeds and the winged beings. And I just love, and you take only what you need, and you always give back, and you always use things to the fullest. And one of the terms that I've heard, it's the term great mystery, rather than sort of using the term God. And I love that as a term, great mystery. I was lucky enough to spend a little bit of time with the Nez Perce tribe, and listening to them and their history, their story. And And if only we get that chance to hear from other people. There is so much. Yes, absolutely, we are one with nature. Everything that we do to nature, we do to ourselves.
Yeah, and you know one of the people that I researched was a Russian man by the name of Nicholas Notovich, in the 1800s. I wondered, why was there, when I started doing my research, why do we read about Jesus as a baby, as a child born where he was and everything else up to 13? Then there's a huge big gap until the cross. I thought, that doesn't seem right. What's going on there? And so when I came across Nicholas Notovich, the Russian, who wrote fabulous books, I read them and discovered that he found an old scroll about a man called Issa, I-S-A, Issa. And the description of that man was 100% description of Jesus. And that's why he wrote the book. I mean, the Vatican officials tried to bribe him not to write it, but he did. And again, this is the rivalry that I don't like. Also, a lovely man by the name of Mario Mazzolini. I wrote a lot about him in A Spiritual Awakening. He was actually a priest at the Vatican, and he compared Jesus' teaching to Sai Baba, an avatar in India, who was doing everything, raising the dead, doing everything Jesus did. And he was excommunicated for this. But happily, the man got married after he left. But this is, again, why are they so frightened of these people? You know, why are they so frightened of these truths? I don't understand it. I really don't. Maybe I'm a bit stupid, but I just don't understand it. And I'm sure you feel the same.
Yeah, I mean, sort of, I've just walked away from religion and very much walked into spirituality. My beliefs go way beyond a religious belief. And I've done that. I accept that. I'm comfortable with that. And I think that's the most important thing, is that we are comfortable with the beliefs we choose to have, that they resonate with us. They feel right for us. And yes, I've had my own spiritual awakening because I've been able to do that. And it's trusting yourself and the feelings and the energies you get from things. I met some amazing people within the Catholic Church, some beautiful people. My godmother was a nun, and she was a lovely lady and a very open lady as well, you know, even well into her 80s and experiencing the sound energy that I share. She was open to experiencing that, whereas others were sort of, you know, but even the priests, when I was still going to church, when I mentioned that I'd learned Reiki, there was no get away from me, you devil. It was like, oh, you can heal with your hands. There was no negativity around it. So there are very definitely those that are open within these establishments. And
that's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's good. And I feel that canon that I got friendly with as well, he became open. He really did, because he wouldn't have told me the things he did if he wasn't.
Yeah.
You know, I'll just give you one little clue that's in the book. There's a chapter where people know that the Pope was made because of a man called Peter. And Jesus did not give that name. That it wasn't a man called Peter. That's all I'll tell you about it. I'll tell you who it was in my book. I want people to buy that book, please. It cost me an awful lot of money and attention to get it published. Yeah, that was one of the things he said, but he was open to everything that I spoke about, which is amazing. He was like fascinated with it and quite open. You know, I thought he'd kind of say, you can't say things like that. You know, he didn't. I talked to a young priest who was the opposite. And I said to him, did you ever read the Essene Gospels? Oh, we are not allowed to read those. You know, the young fella.
Jesse, we're coming to the end.
Being important.
We're coming to the end of the program. I've put your website address where people can find some more about your book or books, and then you gave me a YouTube channel link. I've put that in there, and I'll make sure they're under the video for those people who are watching the recording. But is there anything else you would like to share with us before we close the program?
I suppose, like, my deepest wish every day is that children would be taught the truth at school. That's the most important thing. And, you know, for people to know, general public to know themselves, that they are all one with everything in nature, and try to raise their consciousness and frequency vibration. I've put an exercise in my book, actually, that help people to do that, to raise their consciousness. It's an exercise I devised myself and do myself. And it's outside, you know, out on the grass with nature, and people love it.
Jessica, thank you so much for sharing with us today, because obviously when we can raise our consciousness, when we can sort of open ourselves to the truths that are out there, we bring about a great amount of healing for ourselves, but also for those around us. And I really hope that people will sort of look into sort of getting your book, reading your book, of opening themselves up to the truths that are out there, and they are coming to light. And there are so many of us that are really opening up to this. And thank you for being a beacon that supports people to actually have the information that they can make their own choices and decisions from. So thank you so very much for that. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.
And thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Just briefly, next week, we have a today's conversation, the gifts of wisdom found within life's experiences. And Scott and myself's guests are Denise Lefevre and Eileen Dillon. So I hope you'll join us for that. And these are all enlightened people. So please, folks, join us for that. We're going to have working with emotions and moving into a more heart-mind approach to life. And that's what we're talking about here. Heart-mind. It's living from our heart and letting our heart speak to us. So Jessica, thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll be in touch. Take care, be safe, stay well. Namaste, sweet souls. Bye.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.